Thank you for the invitation. I had actually suggested that this particular session be conducted in an interactive fashion so that we can have as many questions as possible. Because I think monologue as a way of reaching out to people is slowly out of its way. It's a dying, let's say, practice. And there is a bit more of participatory feeling if the session is interactive in nature. So I'll just share a few initial preliminary thoughts. उसके बाद जिनको भी सवाल पूछना है वो मॉडरेटर को भेज दें and I'm happy to take those questions, or even if you want you can share it with me directly. I suspect that Mr. Vivek Ojha will be the moderator of the session. So I'd like to congratulate the ABVP team for launching Project Uthan. I think it's a fantastic initiative, especially for students coming from the non-national law school background. I think it is an important initiative. Considering that students from these law schools and let's say non-national law school backgrounds need a lot more network, need a lot more access for internships and let's say other opportunities. So I congratulate the team for this fantastic, well thought out vision. In whatever capacity I can help them, I'm happy to help them. Second, I think I'd like to extend my thanks to the team, ABVP team, for giving me an opportunity to interact with students as well as a lot of other participants on this important day on such an important topic. I hope to be able to answer as many questions as I can. Should I fall short of the ability to answer a particular question, I'm happy to plead ignorance and say that I don't have the answer, but I'll do my best to respond to each and every question. I just have a few preliminary thoughts which I will share in about 5 or 10 minutes, subsequent to which I think we can start taking the questions. I think social harmony and issues such as and words such as love, hate, divisiveness, these are words that are commonly being used and they're being loosely thrown these days in most discussions. Whether it's a political discussion or an academic discussion or a philosophical discussion or a legal discussion, value-added terms which are extremely capable of, which are capable of extreme subjective interpretation are being loosely thrown around. And the one thing that I would certainly draw from Dr. Ambedkar's life is his capacity to face facts and to, let's say, consume facts in a fairly dispassionate fashion and see them for what they are. I have quite a few agreements as well as disagreements with Dr. Ambedkar, keeping with Dr. Ambedkar's own irreverent spirit, because I don't think he believed in deifying or worshipping any particular individual. He was one of the few people who dared to actually challenge the so-called Mahatma status of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So keeping with that particular sentiment, I don't believe in worshipping anyone, at least people who are capable of and must be examined for as long as possible to question their relevance, to question the validity of their ideas, so that we are in a better position to understand their positions as they stood when they existed and the relevance of those positions in the times that we live in. As far as Dr. Ambedkar is concerned, there are quite a few things that he said which continue to impact Bharat society, caste obviously being one of those issues. And the second, of course, is the question of constitution and the way we look at this particular document, whether we have elevated this particular document to the status of some religious scripture. Point number two. Point number three would be the question of treatment of minorities, the question of how do we reconcile facts and history with the need for social harmony. These are certain aspects where I think Dr. Ambedkar's thoughts continue to be relevant. And I think it's fantastic that this particular session is being organized today, when I think people must have read this latest development of this community called the Devendra Vellalar community from Tamil Nadu, which has today formally moved, I think, a proceeding of sorts before the state government of Tamil Nadu, asking to be delisted from the status of the SC communities, from the SC classification. I had the opportunity to actually refer to this particular development about a few months ago in a lecture that I delivered at IIT BHU. And I'm extremely happy that this particular development has translated or is on the cusp of translating to a reality, which I think is capable of changing the entire caste narrative as well as the victimhood narrative that we've all been hearing for decades now, thanks to colonialized versions of Bharatiya history that we have been fed over and over again. Be that as it may, I think it's a fantastic fruition and fructification of Dr. Ambedkar's vision, because when he was asked, I think, the question of when he believed that reservation would be no more important or relevant, he said, let the communities decide for themselves when they don't need any kind of support system or an affirmative action to continue to compete with everybody else. I think it's a fantastic development, and that's something that communities across the country could certainly draw a leaf out of and could seek inspiration from. So these are certain developments which I think are important. Apart from the fact that the 6th of December has other connotations, it's important to understand Dr. Ambedkar's position, even with respect to those connotations, because the 6th of December has quite a few historic, let's say, milestones and landmarks. And I think people are aware of what I'm referring to. So let's have a few questions and let's see what is it that I'm capable of delivering in response to those questions. Try and keep the questions as relevant as possible to the theme and the topic. Even if it's not specific to the theme, perhaps you can even look at it from the standpoint of examining Dr. Ambedkar, but try and keep this around Dr. Ambedkar and the relevance of his ideas to contemporary Bharat. I would request that. And the title of the topic, India versus Bharat, is something that I consciously chose because I think that's an increasingly relevant idea, because that's where I think we are heading towards, that there are two Indias that we live in, and both Indias are constantly fighting. One is India, the other is Bharat. So the cues are contained in the title of the topic itself. So I'm happy to take as many questions as possible. I suspect Vivek will moderate the questions. Please.
Questions will be sent directly to your chat box by Saksham Parmar, who is our host. Please keep an eye on your chat box.
So do I need to choose Saksham, or will it come directly to my chat box?
It will come directly to your chat box.
Okay, done, sure.
So are the questions visible?
I can just see your message which says all questions will be directed to Sai sir. Is that the chat box you're referring to?
That was a message sent to everyone, sir. You'll get questions in the private chat box.
Oh, okay. So Amit Yadav has raised his hand. People can even proceed to ask their questions directly. They don't need to wait for chats. I'm happy to actually entertain even oral questions. That will save us some time.
Sure, sir. I've unmuted him. He can ask the question directly also.
Yeah. So that was Amitanj Yadav. Who was it?
It was Amit Yadav, sir.
Yeah, please. So I've received the first question from Saksham, which is on the relevance of various religious acts on the maintenance of social harmony. What are the religious acts that are being referred to here? If I could have some clarity, perhaps I could respond more specifically, because it's too vague a question for me to answer. Which religious acts are being referred to here, which have a bearing on social harmony? Clarify that. In the meantime, Amit Yadav, please go ahead and ask your question.
So Amit Yadav is not responding.
Yeah.
We've got the latest question from Shri Charan.
Yeah.
Shri Charan says, if it's your position that the constitution is inherently a dharmic document, or at least a document that represents a continuing civilization, necessarily be pitted against Bharat?
In fact, India need not be pitted against Bharat. It is my position that India has been artificially pitted against Bharat, thanks to the manner in which this particular document has been interpreted over the years. And I've said this in at least a couple of talks, that you must try and divide the history of the Constitution perhaps in two baskets. And the two baskets have the following timelines. The intention of the framers of the Constitution with respect to the document that came into existence on the 26th of January 1950, and the treatment and the manner of its interpretation post 1950. It is my genuine belief that there is a third basket, which is after the 42nd Amendment, where quite a few, let's say, adjectives were added to the preamble of the Constitution. So the position of this Constitution with respect to civilization until the 26th of January 1950 is the first basket. Post that, from 50 to 1976 is a critical basket. 1976 onwards, during the emergency, quite a few, let's say, distortions took place as far as the Constitution is concerned, which are yet to be rectified. Those corruptions are yet to be addressed, and those creases are yet to be ironed. So these three baskets, according to me, reflect a certain departure and a marked departure away from the original intent of the Constitution, which has led to alienation of Bharat from India and the domination of India over Bharat. Therefore, if anybody were to read the history of the Constitution, it is not my case that it is a fully dharmic compliant document, or it's a dharmic document in its entirety. I would never make that statement. I'm merely saying that a good number of framers of the Constitution, as well as the language in which the formative documents of the Constitution were crafted, clearly reflect that there was a conscious civilizational awareness in the drafting of the Indian Constitution, notwithstanding the fact that we did partake from, let's say, the 1935 Government of India Act significantly, which Dr. Ambedkar even admitted to without any sense of guilt or without any sense of compunction. So the fact that you may have adopted a certain template which has been handed over to you by the colonizer doesn't necessarily mean that the document is incapable of civilizational accommodation or it was anti-civilization at the outset. Which is why it is important to read the history of the document and not just the document itself. It is my humble opinion, subject to correction, and perhaps my views may change over a point of time, that the distortion and the distance between India and Bharat is necessarily a creation of the period post the adoption of the Constitution, and it is not something that flows from the Constitution itself. So that's my response to the question. Next.
So Avnish Kumar is asking what are your views on annihilation of caste by Dr. Ambedkar, whether it promotes social harmony or not?
See, when you examine Dr. Ambedkar, there is a decent chance that Bharat may have a tendency today to glorify certain aspects of his personality because it is dealing with a certain guilt complex. And therefore, where he needs to be given credit, you must give him credit. But where you may not necessarily rely on his opinions as expert opinions, we still tend to consume those opinions as the opinions of an expert. For all practical purposes, despite his foresight, despite his erudition, I am yet to come to the conclusion that Dr. Ambedkar was a trained historian. If Annihilation of Caste is to be treated as a book which sheds light on the history of caste, or let's say its genesis and its origins in India, I would be extremely, let's say, wary of treating that as a book of history. It is a book of opinions which carries the opinions of a person who has suffered certain life experiences. There is no doubting that fact at all. There is no reason to run away from the fact that there is a certain aspect of Bharat's history where certain sections of the Hindu community have suffered as a consequence of treatment by other members of the Hindu community. There is no reason to run away from that. However, that necessarily doesn't answer the question of what are the origins of the problem and what the problem can be traced to. So I've said this perhaps in two other discussions elsewhere, that towards the end of Annihilation of Caste itself, Dr. Ambedkar, in his correspondence with Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, almost concedes that perhaps he does not have the best of authorities to back his position that caste oppression is inherent to Hinduism and caste oppression is inherent to the structure of caste itself, and whether he understands caste and in terms of the Indian lexicon that is to be used for it remains a serious question that merits further research and further reading. Unfortunately, we have had a tendency to purchase and buy every opinion from Dr. Ambedkar lock, stock and barrel without applying his own, let's say, approach to these issues, which is largely fact-based. And the great thing about Dr. Ambedkar during the course of the correspondence, which is captured in the book itself, is that he starts with the position that since caste is intrinsic and cannot be taken away and cannot be separated from Hinduism, the only way to destroy the structure of caste, according to him, was to destroy the Hindu edifice itself and to destroy Hindu religion itself. That was the starting position in the book. But as the book goes along, and as Mr. Gandhi for once manages to convince Dr. Ambedkar on something and manages to speak something sensible on a certain topic, he manages to convince Dr. Ambedkar that perhaps his positions are based largely on a reading of Swami Dayananda Saraswati's take on caste. And therefore, he ends up asking him, do you have any primary authority? Have you read the sources yourself? Are you in a position to speak on this particular subject with confidence and conviction based on primary authorities? There, Dr. Ambedkar, being the true lawyer, I would say, specifically concedes and says that I'm not in a position to say that with confidence. But if I'm given literature to the contrary, I'm happy to change my position. That is more or less the sum and substance of his conclusion towards the end of the book. Therefore, when people cite Annihilation of Caste, I have to ask myself, have they read anything beyond the title of the book? Have they actually gone through the entire journey of that particular book? Do they understand what is the genesis of that particular book? Why was he forced to write that book in the first place? Because he wanted to deliver a speech at, I think, a session at an annual conference of Jat Paat Todak Mandal. And since they asked him for a copy of his speech to vet before he was given the opportunity to present his views, he refused to give his speech in advance for any kind of vetting. And therefore, he decided to convert that particular speech into a book. And that book ends up taking the form of a correspondence between him, the Jat Paat Todak Mandal, and ultimately Mr. Gandhi. So when you read that book, according to me, that book itself starts capturing somewhat, to some extent, his concession on his views with respect to the historic basis of caste or the scriptural basis of caste, and its integrality and its essentiality and centrality to the Hindu religion. These are aspects which require greater treatment and greater scholarly treatment. I am not going to say that ignore Dr. Ambedkar's opinions on this particular issue. I'm merely saying recognize that every subject has a certain amount of scholarship and a certain amount of training that it calls for. Dr. Ambedkar was speaking from the standpoint of someone who has suffered a certain experience, which certainly makes him eligible for taking a position on the experience that he has undergone. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's speaking from the standpoint of erudition or he's speaking from the standpoint of, let's say, scholarship on that particular subject. These are two very different aspects. Dr. Ambedkar can always take the position and could have always taken the position that this particular structure, according to me, is inhuman. He's entitled to take the position as someone who suffered that particular system. But when you make the statement from there that in order for the system to be killed, the Hindu religion itself must be killed, I would be extremely wary of that particular position, because I would then say, one, are we failing to strike a distinction between caste oppression and caste? If that's the case, caste, if it translates, existence of caste, if it translates to caste oppression, existence of religion also translates to religious oppression. So why not destroy every religion? So why don't we kill the religious identity itself? These are certain important questions which perhaps people fail to ask because they approach Dr. Ambedkar's writings with a sense of guilt, saying that we have to somehow justify everything that Dr. Ambedkar has said because he has suffered and his communities have suffered. I'm sorry to say that I don't think necessarily is the right approach. It is certainly not the right approach from a social harmony standpoint, because social harmony, I don't think, can be created through, let's say, a certain inquiry which is premised and rooted in guilt. You need to approach it on the basis of facts. You need to approach it on the basis of some kind of evidence, some kind of even anecdotal evidence. I'm completely fine with it. But when you're looking at questions with respect to the destruction of a religion itself, I would certainly ask for greater circumspection and caution. Next.
A participant who goes just by the name A wants to know your views on the recently promulgated Love Jihad ordinance in UP. Will it help in bringing in social harmony or not?
I am honestly not sure if that particular legislation should be looked at from the standpoint of addressing Love Jihad. Those are political statements. I'm merely going to look at it from the standpoint of whether interfaith marriages are truly interfaith marriages, or whether they translate to conversion to a particular religion. Because if they translate to conversion to a particular religion, I suspect that it may not be called an interfaith marriage, because interfaith marriage would mean both partners retain their respective religious identities and continue to live under the same roof as husband and wife. If that's not the case, I don't think that qualifies as an interfaith marriage. Most importantly, given the examples of sexual grooming of members of certain community by, let's say, groups belonging to some other identity, I think it's important to look at this particular issue from the standpoint of targeted grooming of women from a particular community. So when you use the word love jihad, I believe that it has been trivialized and it ends up trivializing the seriousness of this particular issue. Most importantly, given that grooming of members of certain communities, of women of certain communities, is not limited to India. It is an experience that even the United Kingdom has gone through, several other countries have gone through, and gradually such examples are beginning to show up in Sweden, Norway, Finland, Netherlands, France, and all those countries which welcomed 1.5 million immigrants, so to speak, and even in America. Therefore, when you look at global development and the manner in which a certain pattern is emerging, it is not just a case of love jihad, it's a case of targeted sexual grooming of women belonging to a certain community with a very clear, specific, identifiable agenda behind it. So let us use the word sexual grooming as opposed to love jihad, because then this entire issue acquires a certain sense of seriousness, and then we will be able to address it. And social harmony, according to me, cannot be achieved through a wimpish, squeamish, wishy-washy approach to facts and history. You have to confront facts, you have to face reality, and then ask yourself, given these circumstances and given these facts, how do I address the situation? Not by ignoring the facts and brushing them under the carpet, but by taking those facts head on and addressing them. So if, let's say, applying Dr. Ambedkar's approach and logic, if caste oppression needs to be traced to a particular religious scripture, perhaps religious oppression can also be traced to a particular scripture. I don't see how that particular logic can differ, right? Therefore, I think applying Dr. Ambedkar's lens and his approach, which was clearly evident in his book, Pakistan and the Partition of India, India must have perhaps the guts at least now and the spine at least now to look at facts as opposed to running away from them and trying to fashion a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb out of something that does not exist. It's important to address these issues. So social harmony is not in mouthing platitudes on social harmony and the need for social justice, but by showing the spine and the courage of your conviction to deal with history, not to fashion history or to fabricate history. Next.
So another user wants to know about your views on the recently passed farm bills. Are the farm protests or farm unrests politically motivated or not? Or are their concerns genuine?
I'm not an expert on everything that goes on in this country. And certainly with respect to the farm bills, I'm yet to apply my mind to it because I've been busy with quite a few things. But I have just a few observations to make on the manner in which protests have taken shape, where religious hues have suddenly come about and anti-India views are beginning to shape up. Since I have not read the farm bill and I have not followed the entire development, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt that some people may have a genuine cause of concern or a genuine objection to the provisions themselves or the implications of those provisions. I am not on the merits of that particular issue. But the fact that each such issue ultimately translates to a launchpad for targeting Bharat and to shaming Bharat outside and ultimately pitting few communities against each other gives me the distinct impression that there are fairly powerful vested interests at work which seek and smell an opportunity in every such controversy. And if the farmers really wanted their opinions and their positions to be taken seriously, and the farmers of that particular state wanted the rest of the country to take their position seriously, they should have isolated every extremist voice which is hijacking this particular issue. And now it has become about, let's say, the Khalistan issue, let me use that word now, as opposed to what it was supposed to be, which is about farmers' issues. Okay? Look at how nastily it has blown up. the kind of protests that you look that are being generated in London, the kind of reactions in Canada, I'm sorry to say that can never be tolerated. And certainly not in the name of farmers, and certainly not in the name of social justice. I will not stand by it even one moment. I said this even during the course of the CAA movement, that whoever has a problem with CAA has the right to protest and has the right to specifically point out what their actual problems are. But if somebody decides to use the CAA to whip up Hindu phobia or decides to go after the civilizational identity of this particular country, I will not support it even one bit, even if there is a legitimate objection to the legality of the CAA. Let me say that. Similarly, even with respect to the Farm Bill, any attack on the integrity of this country or its civilizational identity should not be, will not be, and cannot be tolerated anymore, regardless of who happens to wield that particular sword. I don't care who it is ultimately. There cannot be an attack on the core identity of this particular country. And as long as that particular core identity does not assert itself, you will continue to face this nonsense, because everybody will keep calling you a coward, and everybody will assume that they have the God-given right to step on your heads and treat you like a human doormat. And this is effectively the consequence of this kind of indulgence over the decades. So I would suggest that have the guts to call out this hypocrisy and ask people to speak on the issue, as opposed to bringing issues like Khalistan. Khalistan was never a reality and will never become a reality. That can never happen under any circumstances. So let them stick to the issues of farmers. That's in the best interest of everyone. Next.
Sir, a user who goes by the name of Govind.
Yeah. Is there a question? I think there's a voice issue. Am I the only one experiencing it, or is everybody else experiencing it?
Vivek, you will have to repeat the question. There's an issue in the voice. Your connectivity is a little poor. You'll have to repeat it. Vivek, am I audible? Vivek?
Someone will need to call Vivek. I don't think he's in a position to. नीरज जी, आप विवेक को एक बार कॉल कर लीजिए.
Yes, Vivek is online, sir. I'll put him.
After
Okay. I think I've understood the question. I think all the keywords have come in, so I think I've made sense of it.
Sir, he's not speaking. The connection error, I think that is repeating the question again and again. He is not speaking. So I'm
तो मैं
trying to...
म्यूट कर देता हूँ और मैं जवाब दे देता हूँ.
जी,
Okay.
जी, sir.
So based on all the important keywords, I think the question is, despite being in power, how is it that the left has managed to continue to make an impact, whereas the right has not created any change in the situation or the ecosystem? Perhaps I'm saying this for the nth time. I'll repeat myself again. You are not the right. Stop using the word right for yourself. The moment you impute labels and tags such as right, you end up putting yourself in the same basket as supremacists in the United Kingdom and United States. you're not the right. Please understand this very, very clearly. बस का सीट नहीं है, जहां पे जो खाली है वहां पे बैठ गए. Okay. So just because others have called themselves the left, you're not the right. And there's a reason I consciously use the word Indic. I don't use the word right for a very specific reason, because of all the connotations, and most importantly, because it is rife with colonial assumptions. You're not France, you're not United Kingdom for us to appropriate terms such as left and right. That has been imposed on us. That's precisely what I've been trying to write over a series of 30 pieces in the Daily Guardian on decoloniality and other subjects. And I'm in the course of working on something larger, and hopefully in another 2 to 3 months it should be out. But please desist from using the word left and right. Even if the others call themselves the left, you are not the right. Let that be the first rule. So what are we? Left and right के जो concepts हैं, उसका स्रोत ही अलग है. Okay. The source itself is different. If you believe that you want to be the Vishwaguru, how do you hope to be the Vishwaguru by actually using the tools of the colonizer? I don't understand how that even works. You can't expect the rest of the world to look up to you for solutions on civilizational issues and universal issues and existential issues and still go with the same rules of the colonizer. Then you're a wannabe for all practical purposes. Why should the world look up to you when it has the original to look up to? Doesn't make sense at all. Second, so what is the sroth of your ideology? It is dharma. But dharma hai kya? So in fact, when you ask people, when you say you're fighting for dharma, what is it that dharma actually translates to? Dharma का स्रोत क्या है? अगर धर्म अपने आप में एक स्रोत है, तो धर्म के पीछे कुछ नहीं है क्या? उसके पीछे कोई सोच नहीं है क्या? So you have to understand the triple layered concept that, let's say, dharmic philosophy follows, which is the root is not dharma. The root is Rita. That's your origin point. So from Rita comes Satya, and from there comes Dharma. What does it translate to? You look at thought, speech, and action. So there must be Rita in thought, Satya in speech, and Dharma in action. Okay? Therefore, the root is what is universal righteousness, or what is right and what is wrong. That is where you come from as far as the Indic philosophy is concerned. And the best part is, Indic philosophy, thanks to its evolution over thousands of years, may have had a racial connotation at some point. I'm not even in a position to comment on that. But its evolved form does not have the concept of a chosen people. It does not have the concept of this is right because it comes from me. I am the Arab, therefore I'm right. I am the white Christian European, therefore I'm right. No, we are not such people. That is what makes our claim to a universalist philosophy much superior and much better than every other philosophy that passes off as universally right and universally applicable. So please rid yourself of the belief that you come from the right wing. You are not the right wing. Anybody who listens to my talks and is interested in taking a leaf out of at least one thing that I say, assuming that everything that I say is useless and wrong, this is the one thing I'm not wrong on, which is do not appropriate these terms. Give up these words called progressive, liberal, conservative, whatever it is. All of this ultimately revolves around the same colonized mentality that the entire world has been subjected to since the Columbian expedition of 1492, when colonization effectively started. That's what history says. And the colonizers' intention to discover new worlds in 1492 was driven by his Christian notion that I must educate and civilize the rest of the world. Read literature on this. Even the West has started recognizing the religious, supremacist, and the racist motivations behind this entire philosophy. So the colonizers' descendants and successors have understood what their origins are, and now हम लोग जो बस निकल चुकी है उसको पकड़ के घसीट रहे हैं हम लोग. Makes no sense. गाड़ी ट्रेन से निकल चुकी है, आप उसको छोड़ दो. Leave colonial lens completely and look inward. The kind of legacy that you are inheritors to, you can put the entire world to shame. They really have not much to teach us on philosophy, on law, on let's say on culture, civilization, nothing. When the word civilization and civilized nations are used by Westerners, and when they use enlightenment as the benchmark to judge the rest of us, It is Christian enlightenment supremacy at play. Please understand that, because enlightenment has a very, very clear Christian character. So you have to look at the history of Renaissance. You have to look at the history of Age of Discovery. Then you have to look at Christian Reformation. Then you have to look at what happened in Enlightenment. And each of these is distinctly Christian in character and European character. So European history is being passed off as global history, as if the rest of us have no history at all. You know why they called it the Age of Reason? Because until then they were living in dark ages. The rest of the world was not living in the dark ages. हम लोग नंगे नहीं घूम रहे थे, वो लोग घूम रहे थे. Be clear about it. Your history goes much beyond what these people can even imagine. Your concept of time goes much beyond what these people are capable of even imagining. The concept of an eon, or the concept of a Brahma Muhurta, the concept of Brahma's age, this is something that they're not capable of wrapping their heads around. Their entire thought is linear. They don't even understand the concept of cyclical evolution, particularly when it comes to history, the rise and fall of cultures. They've just about started. So they are bachas when compared to us on this particular issue. Okay? So behave like the descendants of a truly ancient and living civilization, not as imitators of something that is being junked in the dustbin of history. That's the first step. Ecosystem की जो बात होती है, जो हम रखते जाते हैं ना, that can't be established on the basis of unoriginal thoughts on left and right. Liberalism. Okay? First, अपने आप को पहचानिए, and आप अपने अंदर से एक इंस्पिरेशन को ढूंढिए कि आगे की सोच जो होगी उसका मेरे पास्ट के साथ, मेरे भूत के साथ क्या नाता है. You start with that. And when you do that, frankly speaking, the left will crumble because the left itself is unoriginal. I have never seen them capable of responding to an original argument. वही घिसे पिटे arguments होते हैं इनके पास, वही 4 से 10 बुक पढ़े होंगे, उसके ऊपर उनको कुछ नहीं आता है. And the most important thing is, there is no version of the left that is as ignorant as the Indian left. Okay? The Indian left is even more ignorant than the global left. And please note this, that the global left के अंदर जितनी diversity है और जितना realization है कि उनके ancestors ने बाकी communities और बाकी religions के साथ क्या किया, ये यहां पे नहीं है. भारत का लेफ्ट जो है उसको मार्क्सवादियों ने पूरी तरीके से हाईजैक कर लिया है. So Indian left is nothing but Marxist appropriation of a certain philosophy. Trust me when I say this. In principle, there are quite a few aspects that a true leftist and perhaps a true Indic may even agree upon, for instance, on issues of development and an approach to nature. These are aspects that we may end up even agreeing upon. And the reason why we are pitted against each other is because the left has been weaponized by the Marxist, along with, let me say it bluntly, with certain evangelical and Abrahamic vested interests, which have decided to weaponize the left to target the indigenous identity of this country. So, as law students, language is important. There is an evolving and perhaps an evolved branch of study called colonial linguistics. Please read it. I think that term was first introduced by a scholar by the name Partha Chatterjee. Read his work. He's supposed to be among the foremost scholars of nationalism. He has been a critic of that particular subject, but slowly even his views are beginning to take a different shape, because उम्र होते होते लोगों को थोड़ा तो ये नजर आता है ना कि भैया हमने आज तक जो कहा है, maybe we have actually affected our own roots in the process of earning a livelihood. Okay, so the world is moving at a different pace. Don't be stuck in this Cold War nonsense. Cold War को खत्म हुए, I mean जमाना हो गया, आप आगे बढ़ो. Think of the Indic philosophy, contribute to the Indic philosophy, and भारत को वेस्ट के ढांचे में डालने की कोशिश मत कीजिए. भारत अपने आप में एक संस्कृति है, एक जीवित संस्कृति है. बाकी संस्कृतियां मर चुकी हैं, हम जीवित हैं, उसका एक रीजन है. Go through the history of Americas, go through the history of Caribbean, go through the history of Australia, go through the history of New Zealand. And each of these regions, so to speak, and continents, so to speak, do you think they were always Christian? कि Christian कैसे बने और कब बने? लेकिन हम Christian क्यों नहीं बने? We haven't even become Muslims, for God's sakes. That hasn't happened. for after thousands of years of invasions, and you're being told that you're descendants of a defeated society. I'm sorry, I'm perhaps the only victorious civilization that has withstood the ravages of time and history for close to 1500 years. That is the root of this entire nonsense. I'm grateful for this question because the floodgates have been opened. All I'm trying to say is rubbish this. जो भी आपके साथ लेफ्ट राइट की बात करने आता है वो पुराना हो चुका है और वो पुराना होने वाला है. ये मैं आपको लिख के दे रहा हूं. In my living time, in my life and time, I will make sure that left and right become redundant in this country, at least wherever they become redundant or not. आप धर्म की बात कीजिए, इंडिक फिलॉसफी की बात कीजिए. मुझसे लोगों ने यह भी पूछा है कि भाई आप इंडिक क्यों बोलते हैं, धार्मिक क्यों नहीं बोलते. अरे भाई आप इंडिया क्यों नहीं बोलते, कि इंडिया क्यों बोलते हैं, भारत क्यों नहीं बोलते. My point is, India is perhaps what you wish to project. I don't completely agree with it. Indic is perhaps a crude approximate translation of dharmic. That's my true position. I'm not even running away from it. I've said this abundantly several times. I'm merely using a word that others are capable of understanding so that they know where I come from. Because I have to converse and engage with the rest of the world and tell them, this is my position. आप क्या कर लोगे मुझे बताओ. I'm not going to move from this position. I'm not going to butt from this position. I know what I'm talking about. Therefore, you want to build an ecosystem, start with original thoughts. And don't read nonsense and the refuse of history. Read Indian philosophy. Start with the Shad Darshanas. And understand what our thought processes are. भारत समय को कैसे देखता है, भारत काल को कैसे देखता है, भारत देश को कैसे देखता है, भारत संस्कृति को कैसे देखता है, ये पहले आप समझिए. Because you have to understand that ultimately time and history पे जिसका कब्जा है, he is ultimately the master. And the Western civilization effectively represents the complete domination of time and history of the rest of the world by Europeans and the Westerners. Western civilization is nothing but the product of Western European civilization, which is what ultimately led to the creation of the Americas, Latin America, so on and so forth. So, उनका ये मानना है that हम जिसके इतिहास को मानते हैं वो इतिहास है, बाकी सब मिथोलॉजी है. हमारे इतिहास की परिभाषा को इन्होंने पूरी तरह से बदल दिया है. ये बताएंगे कि हमारी इतिहास क्या है. Imagine giving somebody the right to actually control not just your present but your past, which is even more important. Because every person wants to know where he comes from, what is his origin. He is telling you that I will decide what your origins are. Okay, it's as good as a neighbor coming and telling you who your father is. लपड़ नहीं लगाएंगे आप किसी को. If somebody decides to tell you who your father is, other than your mother, what will you do? भाई तू आजा बात करते हैं. That's what you will say, right? That's what you will say. As a society and as a civilization, we seem to be perfectly comfortable letting every Tom, Dick and Harry coming from other organizations and other countries telling us who our ancestors are. अरे भाई तू बैठ जा, we know better than you. तू मत सिखा. That must be the straight answer. There is no better response to this nonsense than the Delhi lingo. So my honest suggestion is, come out of this. Recognize a mental slave the moment he uses left and right. Immediately say, boss, you have not come out of this nonsense. Okay? This is my single biggest suggestion. Even if Dr. Ambedkar used the word left and the right, remember that that was a period when the world was still reeling under the impact of coloniality and colonialism. You're still looking at mid-20th century. Okay? World War se leke Cold War tak coloniality continued to have a free reign in the form of Western imperialism. And only after 1989, the world has started asking these questions. Hum kis chakravyuh mein phas gaye hain? That's basically the question. Okay? Most people have a problem with the non-alignment movement because that put us in the lap of Soviet Russia. Okay? And therefore, of course, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru is to be blamed for that. However, I have to ask this question. Non-alignment movement, in principle, was a movement away from capitalism, was a movement away from communism, was a movement away from the West as well as the East to say, हम अपनी तकदीर खुद decide करेंगे, आप मुझे मत बताइए. That was the basic position. Look at these issues slightly dispassionately. Come out of your political baskets. Look at it more from a civilizational basket. You will make sense of it better. Okay? Next question.
Sir, the next question is,
Yeah.
the legal course of India, jurisprudence and judgments of the Supreme Court is primarily colonial in nature, earlier derived from common law and now being influenced largely by Western jurisprudence, and Shakespeare is cited more than Valmiki or Vyas. Can we build a nation of our dream throughout such jurisprudential discourse?
I'm going to share certain nuggets with you in response to this question, which I wanted to release a few months later, but let me just give you, let's say, an iceberg, let's say the tip of the iceberg point of view. सबसे पहले आप ये बात समझिए that for 500 years, it's not just Bharat, but the entire world that has reeled under a common umbrella, which is the European colonization experience. Colonizers की पहचान अलग अलग हो सकती थी, but they were all European, coming from the same mentality. They were remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, Christian Empire, very clear. Okay. Now, so if you look at the constitutions of Singapore, you look at the constitution of Pakistan, you look at the constitution of Southeast Asia, article for article, the language is similar. Almost. When you speak of Article 14 of Bharat's Constitution, you can refer to the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. It's that easy. It's that easy. मतलब आंकड़े और नंबर में भी कोई डिफरेंस नहीं है. I am not saying पूरा चेप रखा है. I am not making that statement. I am saying at that stage, you have to realize that people were interested in continuity. Why? 500 से ज्यादा प्रिंसली स्टेट्स को एकत्र करके आपने एक राज्य बनाया, एक राष्ट्र बनाया. तो क्या आप किसी को चक्रवर्ती नियुक्त करते हैं? Will you make someone an emperor? What will you do? You need continuity, because the Englishman is saying, the moment I leave, you guys are anyway going to fight amongst yourselves like dogs and die. So how do I care? I'm leaving. What do you do then? You have to create a system that manages to survive all the internal, let's say, differences. And therefore, the one good thing that he did, not because he wanted to do good for us, was to create certain institutions that could help us take this entire thing forward as one nation. I'm not saying we are not one nation before. We were one civilization before. Because the concept of nation state also is a legacy of the European colonization. So let's not get into that. The point is, ये institutions हमारे लिए जरूरत थी because you needed to ensure that we protect ourselves from this hostile region and the hostile interests surrounding this. By partition, you created two hostile neighbors. You created one hostile neighbor who became two hostile neighbors subsequently. Coupled with that, you had the dragon waiting in arms. Right? China na kabhi bhai tha, na aaj bhi bhai hai. So the point is, in light of that, certain ad hoc mechanisms being put in place, I can't critique and criticize it sitting in 2020. Okay? When India is better positioned. But what will I criticize? भाई 70 साल हो गए, आप आज भी यूरोप के डिसीजन साइड किए जाए, भारत से आपको कुछ साइड करने के लायक नहीं दिख रहा है. I understand, 47 में ये नहीं हुआ, 50 में नहीं हुआ, ठीक है, 60-70 में भी नहीं हुआ, 80 के बाद क्या हो रहा था? After 1980, what is the excuse left to the Indian establishment for continuing to cite decisions that come from both sides of the Atlantic? Makes no sense whatsoever. Because you did not address the issue of coloniality. आपने colonialism को address किया, लेकिन coloniality को address नहीं किया. Colonialism जो है, वो एक व्यवस्था है. Coloniality जो है, वो एक मानसिकता है. There is a difference between a state of mind and an institution. The institution left, the colonizer left, but his mentality continued. And people assume that this is unique to Bharat. No. Africa has gone through that experience. Other countries have gone through that experience. Some have managed to escape that experience because they had the sense to say, I will use the Englishman's institutions as a stopgap arrangement, as an ad hoc arrangement. And after that, I will slowly start infusing my ideas into this particular system. You should have done that in the 70s. But by 1976, Srimati Miss or Mrs. Indira Gandhi introduced secular into the constitution. And what does that mean? You're no more in a position to use your identity. You're no more in a position to assert your identity. You can't even say, I'm sorry, I'm a dharmic nation. I am an Indic nation. The problem did not start in 1947, for God's sakes. It started in 1976, which took away your right to even assert your own identity. Every European country is capable of calling itself a Christian republic, is capable of calling itself a Christian country, but Bharat can't call itself a Hindu country, precisely because of this word. And the worst part is, thanks to our hugging of this cactus called left-right nonsense, we continue to mouth this nonsense of secularism without understanding. Secularism was a response to Christianity, not a response to Hinduism. Secularism was a consequence of Christian movements in Europe, who basically said, this Pope is interfering in every aspect of my running of my sovereign state, and therefore I need a separation of what? The church from the state. Nobody said this in the context of a temple from the state. That's the history. You will understand the experience of India better when you have the benefit of comparing what other colonized nations have gone through. Then you will understand the strategies being employed there, or which were employed there, and what are being employed in other parts of the country today. Your inherent strength as a civilization is the only reason that you have not converted to any form of Abrahamic faith. So, when you think of the Constitution, when you think of Shakespeare and all that, judgment किसको साइड करता है, that is not the issue. The point is, क्या आप लोगों ने अंदर देखना शुरू किया? Have you started introspecting? As, let's say, as an establishment, neither the executive has, nor the legislature has, nor the judiciary. But somehow we seem to constantly blame the judiciary. For 7 years, we have had so-called, let's say, a party with a difference in power. What changes have been made with respect to colonial approach? I dare ask this question. Let the legislature and the executive show the way. Let them lead the country in a decolonial direction and say, we are junking some of this nonsense. Let them start doing it. When the executive and the legislature start doing it, clearly that means there is public support for that particular movement, and that public support will be conveyed to the third arm of the country. You can't expect one arm of the country, which is not answerable to everybody else, to suddenly make the change. Those who are in a position to answer to others, let them start answering to our questions and let them start making the change. 282 से 303 भी हो गया भाई, और क्या चाहिए? क्या 543 हाथ में दे दें, उसके बाद करेंगे? तो ये एक्सक्यूज कब तक चलेगा? माइनॉरिटी गवर्नमेंट्स को रखे, कोalition गवर्नमेंट्स को रखे, पिछले सरकारों ने क्या क्या करवा लिया भाई? आरटी, एनएसी, क्या क्या करवा लिया? आपके पास तो ब्रूट मेजॉरिटी है आफ्टर राजीव गांधी और द बिगेस्ट लार्जेस्ट गवर्नमेंट. एड्रेस कीजिए आप. It's a very convenient thing to constantly point to the judiciary's ability to cite other judgments. What policies are you citing? What is your economic policy? What's your policy to nature? What's your policy to civilization? What's your policy towards Indian festivals? What's your policy with respect to indigenous Indian industries, like the firecracker industry? Let's see, talk about it. So it's easy to constantly find others to blame. लेकिन आपके हाथ में जो है, उसके साथ आप क्या कर रहे हैं, उसका उपयोग कैसे कर रहे हैं? जब तक ये सवाल हम नहीं पूछेंगे और ये लेफ्ट राइट का ये टॉम एंड जेरी का गेम खेलते जाएंगे ना, यही सवाल आपको आपके पीछे आते रहेंगे. यू विल कॉन्स्टेंटली बी फेस्ड बाय द वेरी सेम क्वेश्चंस. Try to look beyond narrow baskets and understand it from the perspective of global history, which way this is moving. Then you'll have a lot of answers. At the very least, your questions will be better. जब सवाल ठीक हो जाएंगे और उसमें एक sharpness आएगा, you will force the other person to think and respond better to those sharp questions. Next question, please.
Thank you, sir. So next question is by Mayank. That is also based along the same lines. So how can we move forward with our Indian values and Western influences together, as they both contradict more than they go hand in hand? That's precisely the question.
Is this question from an individual perspective, from a social perspective? What is the frame of reference? What is the scale of reference? Clarify that for me and I'll answer.
Sir, I think he has asked it for himself from an individualist perspective.
Fine. So let me ask myself this simple question. I am an individual. I am surrounded by colonial institutions and Western institutions around me. Instead of ether, I see only Westernism and modernity around me. Okay, that's the reality that I live in. There's no changing that. Okay. However, somehow I have managed to outgrow this and I'm able to look through this. It's almost like Neo being able to see Matrix. Okay. So I can see what exists around me and I'm able to see through this nonsense. And there's a reason for it. And the reason is my personal practice of what I believe is dharma. You can't hope to speak for dharma or work for dharma unless and until you practice it in some way, in some tangible way. You want a much more politically incorrect example? I'll give it to you. How is it that there is something called as the Arab world or the Muslim world that exists in an otherwise Europeanized, colonialized world? That means there are some faiths and cultures which have managed to retain their originality, notwithstanding the ocean of coloniality. Why? Because they have managed to keep their centers of knowledge, their centers of civilizational production, or their, let's say, epicenters of civilization alive, which is their religious nerve centers. You have used the state, you have used words like secularism, you have used every institution available, you have used even environment for God's sakes against a certain culture that worships environment. And you have significantly eroded the space of Indic civilizational centers, namely temples, period. And you have reduced your temples to the status of ornamental institutions, which are meant for celebrations, festivities, and selfish prayers. Beyond that, nothing. The social value of that particular institution has been reduced to your biggest contribution to mathematics, which is 0. Okay? And since you have yourself choked and suffocated those institutions, my generation at least had the benefit of going to the temple and understanding what your culture is. I doubt whether subsequent generations will even have that luxury. Luxury, I use the word consciously and considerately. In my generation and before that, a group of friends, college-going friends and adolescents, would find it absolutely comfortable to go or to start on a temple trip. You ask anyone studying in Delhi, Mumbai, or any metro, if as friends they'd be interested in visiting a temple together. Not as a place of worship, at least as a cultural place. Nothing. The moment you do that, your modernity will kick alive and say, no, who will visit a temple? I'm so sorry. I will visit a cathedral. I will visit a church. I will visit a dargah. I'll even visit a gurudwara, but temple, no. Next question, please.
Yes, sir. So you were right on how we have these colonial institutions and colonial influence all over us. So we just got to see one of the examples. So the next question is from Siddharth. And the question is, why has the Supreme Court of India made English mandatory in its proceedings while the Indian languages have been left behind? And what can be done?
Here's what I would suggest. The best thing would be learn from the other side. And why don't you write a student representation to the Chief Justice of India raising this question? Do it. Because it's important. I think it's a question that must be asked and answered. As law students, you have a right to know on what basis was a foreign language decided as the medium of communication and the medium of transaction of the Supreme Court. Go ahead, ask this question. I think you should. It's an extremely valid question. If the Supreme Court seems to have the time to entertain petitions with respect to the chanting of Asatoma Sadgamaya in CBSE schools and in central schools and Kendriya Vidyalayas, I think it certainly has the time to entertain a petition with respect to the use of English as the language of communication and transaction for the business of the Supreme Court. So go ahead, write a representation. I'd like to really understand the Supreme Court's own position on this. आप हिंदी में भी Supreme Court में बात नहीं कर सकते हैं. That's the interesting part. I don't understand whether other languages even stand a chance. Because others are regional languages and one language is supposed to be the national language. Next.
So that's a good idea. So although we have a lot of questions, we have 50 more questions in queue. But due to the positive time, we'll just take this last question and wrap up
Yes.
the session. So this question is from Mehul. And the question is whether we need to consider Constitution as a holy book. As developed nations like USA, it doesn't have historical civilizational roots, unlike in India. Its constitution has, unlike India, the constitution of USA has unique national binding force. So can the same thing be said for India, or holy book term is used as a misnomer?
The United States, at least its founding fathers, so to speak, certainly saw themselves as the continuity of a certain European identity. Anybody who thinks otherwise has not read enough. Please go to California and take a look at the emblem of California and look at the language used there. They use Latin, and I think it's a Roman goddess or a Greek goddess who's actually featured on their emblem. Okay? They are not rootless. They are not deracinated. They clearly know where they come from, notwithstanding the fact that they've moved away from the European motherland. Okay? And there is a reason why they decide to treat the Constitution as the holy book, not because it's the Constitution, but because it has, and it certainly had a clear Christian bent of mind, a clear Christian slant. Are you telling me in the 1700s, people in the United States were not conscious of the Christian identity? Who are we really kidding? If justifications based on the Bible were invented for racism and for slavery, are you telling me that they wouldn't have had a biblical justification for the Constitution itself? Are you telling me that the word God that is used there is only with respect to a formless God? In which case, why doesn't it say gods? Why are they not polytheists? Why do they refer to only one God? We don't subscribe to the idea of one God. What do we do then? So when they speak of pursuit of happiness, there is such abundant literature on what it actually means. So one, there is no comparison. America is by no means a yardstick or benchmark for us to compare ourselves with. Two, there is a brilliant stream of thought which questions the deification of the Constitution as a religious book. This is happening in multiple jurisdictions. They're asking this question. In India, we have decided to treat this as the religious book. We decide to bow before it. It's a book that has been vulnerable to political shifts. It is a book that has been vulnerable to all sorts of political machinations. The First Amendment itself, which resulted in the truncation of the free speech rights, when Article 19.2 was introduced, or rather, the limitations on free speech were actually changed, and the number of limitations were enlarged in 19.2. This was done with Dr. Ambedkar as the law minister and Shri Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru as the prime minister. And the only person to oppose this was Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, saying, how different are you from the British colonizer when you seem to be imposing greater gags on free speech than the colonizer himself? So one, religiosity with respect to Constitution is, I would say, rank ignorance and stupidity. That's the stupidity of the mental slave, of the colonial slave. Because he believes that this particular book is what holds this country together. No, it's the will of the people that holds this country together. The book itself is the product of the will of the people. Which book is capable of withstanding the will of the people? Please tell me. If the book is everything, तो इतने सारे rapes and murders कैसे हो रहे हैं भाई? कानून में भी है, न्यायपालिका है, you have न्याय शास्त्र, then still it happens. What holds you back is either fear or conscience, nothing beyond. So when you look at the Constitution, उसको एक माध्यम सोचिए, उसको एक जरिया बनाइए. Don't make it the end. It is civilization which is always the end goal of protection of the Constitution in any country. Somebody calls it Europeanness, somebody calls it Enlightenment, somebody calls it Frenchness, somebody calls it Britishness, somebody calls it Americanness. We call it Bharatiya identity. So the Constitution is meant to protect that identity because after generations and millennia, you have managed to effectively find freedom and your ability to call your shots and your ability to write your own future and destiny, which for the last 70 years has been written by forces from outside with puppets inside. Thank you.